Hello, my name is Susan Taylor-Martin. I'm the president of Thomson Reuters Legal. And we have dedicated ourselves within our business to creating a more diverse and inclusive work environment. We know that this is the only way to build the strongest team possible to serve our customers. Now, many of our clients in the legal industry are looking at their own organizations and recognizing a need to build a more diverse and inclusive environment too. And today I have the great good fortune of talking with Deborah Rhode, who is the Ernest W. McFarland Professor of Law, the director of the Center on the Legal Profession, and the director of the program in Law and Social Entrepreneurship at Stanford University in Stanford, California. She is a true thought leader when it comes to access to justice, ethics, gender and sexual orientation discrimination, and she's the author and co-author of more than 25 books and 300 articles. Most recently, her new book is The Trouble with Lawyers. Now, she's examined the state of diversity in the legal industry, and she's here to share her findings. So, Professor Rhode, thank you so much for being with us here this afternoon.
Thank you.
Just to kind of start off, tell us a little bit about your own journey and what was your own background and why did you become a lawyer?
I went to law school in the last gasp of the student activism of the 60s, and I wanted to solve poverty or be a civil rights litigator. And it's ironic where I've ended up. The closest I came to civil rights litigation was clerking for Justice Thurgood Marshall. And I write about poverty, but I have only the greatest respect for the people who are in the trenches dealing with it. But many of the concerns that I had as a student around access to justice and social justice and discrimination are ones that continue to inspire my work.
And talking about the kind of access to justice sort of topic for a moment, I mean, what needs to be done to address the fact that over 4/5 of legal needs of the poor and the majority of the needs of middle-income Americans are just not met at all?
Well, it's a shameful irony that we live in the country with the highest concentration of lawyers in the world, and we've done such a poor job in making their services more accessible to those who need them most. I think we need a number of solutions. One is we need to spend more money on civil legal aid programs. Secondly, we need to break lawyers' monopoly over the provision of legal services. Other countries and other professions have done much better by having trained non-professional experts providing routine services, and there's a lot that we could do to make access to trained non-lawyer professionals available. And lawyers need to do more pro bono work. Currently, only a quarter of the nation's legal profession meets the American Bar Association's rather minimal standard of an hour per week a year. So we need strategies on all three of those levels.
Which of those is the single most important that you think would drive the biggest change, the sort of liberalization potentially of legal services?
I think breaking the lawyer's monopoly over the provision of legal services. The pro bono, even if all lawyers met the ABA's aspirational standard and then some, we'd still not be making a dent in the problem. And I think it's unrealistic in this economic climate to expect taxpayers to want to spend more on providing, substantially more on providing basic legal services. Most Americans think that poor people are already entitled to a lawyer in civil legal aid cases, which isn't true.
No, interesting. I mean, you've got this extraordinary perspective on how the practice of law is changing and being reshaped. And it certainly feels, sometimes from our vantage point, I talk sort of personally, it feels like we're on the cusp of really quite significant change driven by technology, the kind of the growing sort of power of the buy side, so the corporations, the general counsel, liberalization of legal services, certainly outside of the US, is starting to drive change outside of the US. What do you see as the biggest change affecting the kind of the practice of law, and why?
Well, I think there are two changes that are having a dramatic effect. One is technology. which has dramatically altered the way that legal services are and can be delivered. And we've yet to take full advantage of that when it comes to access to justice. And secondly, competition within and across professions has dramatically increased. And that's had some downsides for lawyers.
When you think about, your position obviously within one of the finest law schools, Stanford, but only 57% of law students across the US actually get access to a full-time job, kind of legal job post-graduation. Do you think that's a temporary sort of situation, or is that something structural now that you think is happening in terms of the marketplace?
I think most experts believe that the changes that were accelerated by the recent recession have led to permanent changes in the legal marketplace, and that the demand for young, untrained lawyers is not going to get more robust. We're outsourcing more legal work. Technology is removing the need for lawyers in some areas, and other professions are increasingly eating lawyers' lunches.
And so what do law schools need to do to better prepare their students for life after law school?
Well, a lot. How long do we have? 90% of graduates of law school think that they didn't get the training they need for current practice. So we need to have much more skills-based training, much more attention to law firm economics, management, leadership, interdisciplinary work, teamwork, things that we don't adequately teach in law school. And more than that, I think we need to change the framework of law school. It's crazy to think that we should be preparing somebody who's going to do small town family law the same way as somebody who's going to work on Wall Street. And we ought to have 1 year, 2 year, 3 year programs of legal education that capture the diversity in legal tasks that our profession is now performing.
So lots of scope actually for innovation then around the kind of the law school curricula, really.
Yes, I think we need that.
Interesting. And the other thing that's been quite interesting, we've started to see in a state or two in the US, the increased role of non-lawyers and paralegals in delivering relatively limited kind of legal services. Do you see that as a trend that's going to gain traction and become more widespread across the US? And do you think that either helps or does it undermine the kind of the practice of law as you see it?
I think it's going to change. The bar is going to fight it, as they have historically, whenever they feel under competitive pressure. But I think that's the only way that we're going to see dramatic changes in access and affordability. The United States ranks 67th, right after Uganda, in terms of access and affordability of legal services. And part of the reason for that is the extent of the lawyer's monopoly over the provision of routine tasks that other individuals with less training than lawyers could do just as adequately.
On to the subject of diversity, and I know it's a subject you're passionately interested in, and we are really interested in how, certainly from our own workplace, as I said, we can make this a more inclusive environment. We certainly see a number of our clients in the legal space, I think, struggling with how to make a difference. How significant a problem do you think it is? What's your research showed?
Well, it's an irony that the profession that's leading the struggle to level the playing field in other occupations has been so laggard in its own workplaces. Law is the least diverse of the elite professions. And women are now over half of law school graduates. They're a third of the profession, but only 17% of partners at major firms and about a fifth of counsel at Fortune 500 companies. And the numbers for minorities are even worse.
And from your perspective, what can law firms, what can general counsel do to improve that situation? What are the strategies that they should be thinking of to start to make a difference? Because I think many would say, we have a ton of initiatives that we're running, but we just don't seem to be able to make a difference. The number of female partners has stayed pretty stagnant. What can they do to really change the landscape?
Well, the leadership needs to come from the top, and it needs to be informed by data about the firm's performance, both quantitative and qualitative. There's no substitution for tracking things like, if you have a part-time policy, do lawyers feel able to use it? 90% of firms have part-time policies. Less than 10% of lawyers take advantage of them because they're a mark of second-class status in most workplace contexts. Hours sneak up, the quality of work goes down, and most lawyers feel that it simply isn't worth it. So you need tracking and monitoring to see how the fairness of your assignments. You need succession planning to make sure that women and minorities are well represented in positions of leadership within the firm or within the office. And you need to make sure that professional development opportunities are equally distributed. Now, there's a cottage industry of research that shows that unconscious, implicit bias is a problem in the culture generally, and legal institutions are no exception. And more education of leaders of law firms about the dynamics of those biases and the ways that the old white boys network continues to exclude women and people of color is absolutely critical in building impetus for change.
It strikes me that from a corporate counsel perspective, actually the diversity is better, both in terms of kind of gender and ethnicity. A, is that true? And B, do you think that that has a role to play in terms of changing law firm diversity? Because there's absolutely a very strong business case around, as your client is changing, you need to change too so that you're more like your client.
Well, certainly there's enormous progress. When I went to law school, maybe 10% of the profession was female. I didn't have a course by or about women when I was in law school. So we've made enormous progress. And the diversity in corporations has put increasing pressure on law firms to match that diversity, and there's getting to be a bit of networking among women and minorities. They're approaching a critical mass, and they're beginning to be more insistent in demanding teams that look more like the workplace generally.
Yes, I think that in combination with all of the data that there now is that basically said we know that diverse teams make better decisions.
Right. Yeah.
So I think as a client, one's often looking in and saying, actually, if I don't see a diverse service provider, advisor, then I'm concerned that actually I won't get the best decision. So
yes, and that's changed.
Yeah.
More and more clients are asking those questions and making those demands and tracking law firms' performance, and that's been a powerful inducement for change on the part of the legal profession. And it stands to reason that you're just not going to be competitive if you're not taking full advantage of half the talent pool.
Absolutely, absolutely. Is there a role for the bar associations in terms of increasing the diversity of the legal kind of population?
Well, I think they can do much more, in terms of goals and timetables with respect to gender. With minorities, we need to do a lot more outreach and recruitment and better financial aid packages. We need to increase the pool of qualified lawyers at the law school level, as well as ensure that once they get through law school, they have an equal chance for promotion and retention.
Interesting. Deborah, thank you very much indeed for a really interesting discussion around the importance of the topic, the fact that there is much more for us to do at every level in every organization associated with the law, but really appreciate your comments this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.